Welcome to the Coach's Hot Seat podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to an all-new episode of the Coach's Hot Seat podcast with Mark Haines, the commissioner and publisher of the Coach's Hot Seat. I'm your host, Mike Leon. Each week, Mark is going to break down the real forces that shape college football, from contracts, boosters, leadership decisions that really decide who wins on and off the field. Today's episode, we're going to look at those coaches' boss. That's the athletic director. What separates a good athletic director from the ones who end up on the hot seat themselves? Mark's going to go over how the right hire, the right budget, and the right timing can really make or break a program. Mark, it's good to see you as always. This is really a good topic here because I'm very interested in the person who's making all the decisions across the entire athletic department. This topic I know has blown up on Reddit and other places. When you asked who the worst athletic director was, I'm sure you got a lot of votes there for a bunch of different programs. Why do you think fans have suddenly started paying more attention to the person that's hiring the coach?
Thanks, Mike. That's a great question. So it has blown up over the last few years. I think with the large contracts that have been awarded to coaches, fans and boosters are starting to ask questions about why did we give them that contract and what were the motivating, how did you make this decision? And there are some cases where, Kentucky, they had trouble getting out of the contract, right? They ended up not getting out of it. They ended up, paying everything, but it really caused the coaches to stay longer than they maybe should have. It was time probably for a separation, and the school couldn't do anything. So that started boosters, it started fans asking, why are we giving these large contracts? Why do they look like this? And it started to shine a light on athletic directors.
Mark, for people that don't follow the administrative side or maybe even know what athletic director does on a day-to-day basis, what does an actual athletic director control day-to-day inside all of the programs?
Well, it's moved a lot over the years. So, in the 1960s, they were, somebody scheduled the buses and they scheduled other teams and, they kind of coordinated stuff and, it all just went into this pot and nobody really paid attention to it. Over the years, it's grown into a profession all unto its own. So, they're really the CEO of the athletic department. Really, if you want to think about the athletic department as separate from the rest of the school, they're really the CEO. So they control everything: the budget, they control personnel, they control the structure. How many assistant coaches a coach can have, and how they fit into the athletic department as a whole. Support services have exploded over the last 25 years. So you really want to think about it as a professional corporation, and the athletic director is really the CEO. He's the head person, and the buck really does stop with him or her.
Right. I was about to say her because my school just hired Kelly Zinn, right, from LSU. So let me ask you, as you look across the country, perfect example of Kelly Zinn coming from LSU to go to Rutgers, there's some traits that make up how she would move as an athletic director. What are some that you've seen that consistently show up in the athletic directors who have built winning, stable programs?
There's obviously the budget and the business side portion of it. I think the real difference maker now is, how you're dealing with your coaches as people, what kind of relationship you build with them. And when something starts to falter, do you throw them under the bus? Or do you make sure that they get the stuff that they need? Jen Cohen is the athletic director of my alma mater. She came from Washington. She made, 2 football coach hires. One was Jimmy Lake. It didn't work out. She had to let him go. And there was a lot of noise about, we're not going to pay his contract. And Jen said, no, we're going to pay his contract. We decided to terminate him. He did everything he was supposed to do as a football coach. We're going to honor our word and we're going to honor our contract. That said a lot about her as an athletic director. Things didn't work out, but we're going to keep our word. We're going to make sure that the coach is taken care of on the way out the door. You've seen other athletic directors where they just throw the coach right under the bus, and they just don't support them. They don't get them the stuff that they need. Martin Jarmond at UCLA is the first name that comes to mind. He hired somebody to be the football coach, Deshaun Foster, beloved alum, no question about his commitment to UCLA, but he was not ready to be a head coach. He put him in that position. He paid him a lower salary than he would have had to if he'd hired an experienced coach, and then didn't support him, didn't give him the stuff that he needed. And as a result, Deshaun Foster failed, and Martin Jarmond ended up firing him. And I'm sure that you're not going to see Deshaun Foster, the beloved alum, on the sideline at the Rose Bowl or wherever they decide to play in the next few years. You've just lost that, where other more qualified coaches would have been better in that position.
It's always tough hiring an alum, and obviously we remember Foster's first conference and how he kind of stumbled over words, and people are like, "Was this really a good hire?" But let me ask you, just stay out with that example. How much does the timing matter in that example when the athletic director decides whether to fire or hire a coach? Obviously, it's on the field performance, but what else kind of factors in here?
Well, that's a really good question with this example, because for months, Chip Kelly had been signaling he was going to leave. He started signaling he was leaving right after Thanksgiving. And so that was if he was signaling he was leaving, that was the time to move to, let him go and to conduct a search and to bring somebody in. Instead, Jarmond let him stay. And he, all of a sudden in the spring, Chip Kelly has decided he's going to go, and, he resigns. And, now they're scrambling. There was this scramble, but there were still more qualified coaches that wanted the job. I think where it would have made a difference, and where it did make a difference for Jarmond, was, the assistant coaches that he needed to support him weren't available. So he had to make some compromises there. And you could excuse that for the first year, but where the athletic director needed to be was first prepping him for that first news conference and making sure that he knew how to answer those questions. There was no question that was a surprise or a gotcha there, but the guy had not been prepped, right? So that's the first sign that there's something wrong. The second sign was that, okay, we made it through the first year with this, this group of assistant coaches that probably weren't the ones that we wanted. Who do we want? And, are we hiring the right people? And being really involved and guiding him in that process, that just didn't happen. They went out and hired whoever, hired the offensive coordinator from Indiana, probably looked good on paper, but, somebody needs to kind of vet them and find out in coaching circles, is this guy really well respected, or is this really the head coach that's really running that show?
Yeah, media training 101 for that video. I highly encourage people to go check that out. Mark, in a previous episode, we talked about boosters and donors and how they sometimes influence here because they expect quick results because they're putting up money, right? So how does that pressure kind of shape the decisions that these athletic directors are making, and sometimes how it could compound it and make it worse?
Well, it has a heavy influence. I think the Penn State example this year, where James Franklin was fired midseason, really with no warning. I think that was a lot of booster and a lot of fan noise that caused that to happen. A lot of times fans will say, "Hey, we should go get this guy as our defensive coordinator, or that guy as the wide receivers coach," not really understanding that there's a system that coach is putting together, and he wants certain characteristics and certain strengths in those positions. And the guy that is a big name that everybody might want isn't going to necessarily fit into that system. So there's a lot of noise like that. And really the athletic director needs to be kind of the buffer there. The athletic director needs to say to the boosters, yeah, we're considering that, or we're looking at a lot of people, and kind of helping the coach to navigate that outside noise, insulating them from it in some cases.
Mark, let's get to my favorite topic, which is coaches' buyouts and contracts. What's the biggest mistake you've seen ADs keep repeating year over year when it comes to these coaching contracts, these buyouts, these extensions? What are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen them make?
Well, there's nothing in it for the coach. There's no performance metric. So if the coach doesn't perform, we're still guaranteeing him a full buyout. There's no offset. So there's also, in a couple of cases, no offset for if I get another job. So if I get another job, and a lot of the contracts, it will offset the buyout. If I have a $3 million buyout and I get a $2 million job, the school's on a hook for $1 million, the school that they left. So what we're seeing is that it doesn't matter whether they get another job or not. Yeah. The one thing I've seen that keeps coming back is that they are required to look for another job, and that's good. But when there's no skin in the game for the coach, there's no performance metrics. There's nothing that says they have to get a job. There's nothing that reduces the buyout. That really hurts a school.
Yeah. Mark, now we're starting to see athletic directors move almost as much as the coaches or the players in the transfer portal. What does that kind of say about the job and its stability?
Well, it's just like a CEO, you want a really top-notch CEO, really understands the business. At my school, we kept hiring former football players in a specialized field. And I remember the third time we did it, somebody said to me, "Oh God, aren't you excited for this?" And I said, "No, that guy knows nothing about that job. He might be smart in some other places. He definitely was a great football player. There's no question about his commitment to the school, but this is a specialized job and he doesn't know what he's doing."
Mark, as we put a bow on this episode, if you're building a checklist for comprising all of the elements of a good AD, what metrics would you include? Which ones don't tell the whole story in your estimation?
Well, they need to understand athletic budgets and how the athletic budget works and where the revenue comes from and where the expenses are. That's just really basic. But the other things that they've got to understand are the coaching culture and the intangibles that you need to have in a winning football coach. And I think sometimes that gets missed. It looks really good on paper. They've taken their team to the playoffs. They've been in some fantastic bowl games. They've got Heisman Trophy winners, but they don't relate to other people well. They don't mold they're not flexible. They aren't going to embrace the school's culture and history. And the one thing that I keep seeing in coaches who are not building programs where there's a miss is the culture piece. It means something to be a Seminole, but I don't know that Seminoles today know that. That's the best example I've got, is that their problem there really is a culture problem. They've had great skill players. They've gotten great players out of the portal. They've, anywhere where you could look at a spreadsheet, it probably checked all the boxes. The culture is awful.
Yeah, very well said. Mark, can't thank you enough for the time, insights, breaking this all down as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
That's it for today's episode, the Coach's Hot Seat podcast with Mark Haines. If you want to read Mark's latest rankings, the commentary, do me a favor right now. Visit coacheshotseat.com. Every week, Mark is tracking all the programs and the people at those programs that are feeling the most pressure in college football. Before you go, do me a favor, hit like, subscribe, leave a review, comment, share the episode with a college football fan out there who needs to listen. As always, I'm Mike Leon. See everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.